Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. Let's talk about Doctor Who, for a change. Is it too sophisticated? Is it too clever for its own good? Let's find out. Hello, welcome, my name is Paul Mount. If you are new here and you've clicked on this video because you've seen Doctor Who and you like Doctor Who, why not like and subscribe? Because there's a fair bit of Doctor Who content here. I review all the new episodes, bits of merchandise, bits of news and so on. So there's a fair smattering of Doctor Who stuff in amongst some retro TV and film reviews, physical media updates, all that sort of stuff. If you fancy sticking around, all you need to do is press that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up for a like as well, which would be super cool. And leave a comment down below. It's always nice to hear from my community. Talking about Doctor Who. And this is a video which I thought about doing on the weekend in the aftermath of something very minor that happened last week, or a comment that was made last week by a very well-known and very well-respected member of Doctor Who's classic cast. And I haven't really thought much about it, to be honest. I haven't prepared anything. I'm just going to sort of spitball my way through this and invite your opinions as to whether you think there's much validity or any validity in the comment that was made last week. It's a comment made by Peter Purves. Many of us will know him, of course, as a legend from his time as one of the triumvirate of the great days of Blue Peter, when he hosted the magazine show alongside Leslie Judd and John Noakes. But for Doctor Who fans, of course, he has a particular significance because he played a companion to William Hartnell's Doctor in a batch of episodes in 1965-66, where he played Stephen Taylor, an astronaut who came aboard the TARDIS at the end of a serial called The Chase, which featured the Daleks. Peter is now 86. He's one of the last great survivors of that era of Doctor Who, really, along with Maureen O'Brien, who played Vicky, Carol Ann Ford, who played Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter, right back at the beginning. There's not many of those classic era folk left, either in front or behind the camera. And Peter Purves made a nice triumphant return to Doctor Who a couple of years ago when he appeared alongside Maureen O'Brien in one of those little Tales of the TARDIS vignettes that aired as part of the 60th anniversary, showcasing a BBC iPlayer presentation of a classic Doctor Who serial. Peter, however, is still very active in the world of Doctor Who for his age. He still appears on documentaries on the Blu-ray range talking about episodes in his era when they're released, and he even has memories and points to make about the development of the series over the years. It's obviously something which is quite important to him, and he realises that he plays a major role in people's memories of Doctor Who, particularly those early days. As I said, not so many folk left from that time, so it's nice to have him able to talk about William Hartnell, what it was like making Doctor Who in the 1960s. Last week he attended the opening of a new exhibit of Doctor Who memorabilia, costumes and props and so on in Peterborough. It looks like a fantastic exhibition, by the way, and I do hope to be able to make my way there at some time during the summer. It's a bit of a trek to get there, but it looks like a really good museum full of original TV series props and some extremely well-made replicas. It's a great looking exhibition, and Peter came along to open it, and he was quoted in the press as talking about Doctor Who, and this was reported on several online facilities. The BBC picked up on it. Peter Purves' comments on Doctor Who. And the gist of the comment that he made was that he admitted he could not understand the stories in the current version of the BBC science fiction series. The 86-year-old actor spoke to the BBC at the opening of the exhibition in Peterborough. He said that the series had become far too sophisticated for my simple brain, but believed its production values were now much higher, with far more money being spent than when he was in it. Well, yes, that's clearly the case. I think back in his day, BBC spent £2,000 on an episode, which I think at the time was considered a decent, if not brilliant, budget. Nowadays, with Disney funding the production, rumours are that upwards of £6 million is spent on each 45-50 minute episode. Peter went on to say that we used to have stories that were very simple. You went from there to there. You had a cliffhanger at the end of an episode. The following week you picked up from there and went to another cliffhanger. Then end of story, on to another one. Very simple, very straightforward, very very clear and easy for kids to understand. He then went on to say that he stopped regularly watching the 1970s when John Pertwee took over. Despite Pertwee being a friend of his, Purves did not enjoy the show's format of the period, with the Doctor having been exiled to Earth and many of the stories taking place in the south of England. I didn't like the serials then because it got embedded in England, which lots of people think is fabulous and great. Just wasn't for me. It had lost what Doctor Who was all about. He then went on to say that he kept track of the programme's cast changes to avoid awkwardness at conventions, because of course he still attends conventions. I noticed at the Peterborough event he's walking with a stick and looks as frail as you might expect an 86-year-old man to look, but he's still mobile, he's still on about, he still attends events, and quite rightly wants to know the names of various cast members as the show changes over the years. He did finish off by saying that he was impressed by the show's longevity. It's a remarkable thing that a series could continue to hold an audience for so long, and here I am getting very old and being able to talk about it 60 years after I first did it. I'm going to talk about this with you today. Made myself a latte. So what do you think? Is Doctor Who too clever? Is it too sophisticated? And it's an interesting point, particularly discussing this now in the wake of last weekend's episode, The Story and the Engine by Ellams. I wouldn't say it went over my head, but I didn't pick up on everything in the story and the relevance of the story, as was made quite evident from some of the comments that I received. And I'm very grateful to those people who left comments pointing out certain things about the story which I didn't pick up on. I do feel that it was quite an opaque piece of storytelling. You really had to concentrate. You needed to know a little bit, I think, about African folklore and myths and some of the traditions of that barbershop culture and stuff like that. So it was quite a dense episode, which I think was very sophisticated and very clever. Was it too sophisticated? One of the things about Doctor Who is that it was created back in the 60s as a family adventure show that breached the gap between the end of the sports and Saturday evening TV as it was. It's never been a children's programme, and I know a lot of press and comment is made about the children's programme, and I know a lot of Doctor Who fans get really worked up about that because they're watching this show which is being called a children's programme. It's clearly not a children's programme for various reasons. It wasn't made by the children's department of the BBC. It's a drama series shown on a Saturday night. It's the only drama series of this type shown on a Saturday night. It has no connection with children's television, but it's always had a link to kids. Kids bought all the toys. Kids walked around in the 60s being obsessed with Daleks. It does have kid appeal. But one of the things that intrigues me at the moment about Doctor Who is that Russell T Davies, when he's talking about Doctor Who, he talks about it in terms of 6-year-olds watching this and 8-year-olds watching this. And he's done things that are aimed at a child audience which I don't necessarily think is there anymore. I'm not saying kids don't watch Doctor Who, I'm sure that they do, but I believe that the most recent audience figures or analysis has shown that the majority of Doctor Who's audience now is in its 40s, aging fanboys in their 40s plus. And I think the child audience is quite small, although the BBC are reported as saying that they're very pleased with the younger demographic that the show gets. But I think that's possibly in terms of sort of teenagers into 20s and so on. I don't know. I'm not into all these sort of statistical stuff. But it does seem to me that the show isn't really pitched at a very young audience anymore, and I don't know that it ever really was. But Russell's done a couple of weird things. You'll remember a couple of years ago when he decided that Davros was now going to be able-bodied, because he didn't want kids to think of people in wheelchairs as representing evil, which I still think is a nonsense point of view. It's a nonsense attitude, because kids don't see people in wheelchairs and think they're Davros and think that they're evil. He also changed the Doctor's sonic screwdriver so it doesn't look like a screwdriver anymore. It's just this disc type thing. Again, on the basis that he didn't think that kids should see the Doctor brandishing something that looks like a gun, despite the fact that he's done that since the 1960s. However, that's all by the by. This is Russell T Davies thinking that the show still has this big kid appeal. How's that reflected in the stories? Well, classic Doctor Who, and I will be later this week or next week reviewing what is quite a simple Doctor Who story in terms of it's on an alien planet, it's got Daleks in it, there's lots of escapes and recaptures, but it's a very fast-paced action-adventure story. It's not very sophisticated. It's Planet of the Daleks, in case you're wondering. When Doctor Who started, it was very much an adventure in space and time. That was its subtitle. And it was the story of the Doctor and a group of people, his companions, Ian and Barbara, and Susan, his granddaughter, travelling into space, travelling into time, having adventures. And if you look at them now, they're fairly straightforward adventures. They go somewhere, they get involved with people there, they overthrow the bad guys, or they have a journey into time and meet historical figures. And I suppose, yes, they're quite linear. They are quite straightforward adventures, and as Peter Purves quite rightly said, they had cliffhangers that were resolved in the next episode, then he went on to the next dramatic bit that led to another cliffhanger. They were straightforward adventure stories, and I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I love it when Doctor Who does straightforward adventure stories. But this is a show now that's been around for 62 years. Its storytelling is going to evolve, and it did evolve, and during Patrick Troughton's time, the stories became predominantly base under siege stories, where the Doctor and his companions would arrive somewhere that was under attack by something hostile. They would be trapped in there with the people who worked or lived in that area, and they had to sort of help them fend off this attacking force, whether it was Cybermen, Ice Warriors, Yeti, or whatever it was. And that was a format and a formula, and those stories were fairly straightforward, but they were sophisticated in terms of the way they were presented, the characterization, the visualization of the creatures and monsters, the morality, because despite what the go woke, go broke crowd say, Doctor Who's always had a moral compass. It's always been socially aware, particularly later on in the 70s when John Pertwee was on Earth and the show's production team could focus on issues such as pollution. And Barry Les, being a Buddhist, he put a lot of Buddhist philosophy, very subtly layered subtext in his stories he produced. But I think that I would agree that by and large the stories were very straightforward as adventure stories. There was nothing hugely complicated about them. And that, I think, carried on right the way through the series in a way. The stories were quite simple to understand, but they were always underpinned by clever ideas. Whether they were original ideas is another matter, because a lot of classic science fiction, a lot of classic horror was borrowed and used in Doctor Who stories. I think the stories, certainly until the early 80s, were very compelling and inviting, and they were thrilling adventure stories with imagination. Even when they were reusing old ideas and old concepts, there was something imaginative about the way the situation was presented and the scenario was presented. I think in the 80s things changed slightly. You had, for Tom Baker's last season, a new script editor, a scientist called Christopher Bidmead, and he started forging a new direction for Doctor Who. He put the science back into Doctor Who, and we had stories about entropy and E-space, which is this alternative universe that the TARDIS was trapped in briefly, and charged vacuum emboyment. And I think then the stories started to become a little bit less welcoming, because they felt a bit cold, because they were based on scientific principles. They weren't light and airy and inviting anymore. They were a bit sort of distant and scientific. And that, interestingly, is where Doctor Who's figure started to dip. This was post-Star Wars as well, and I've always said that the arrival of Star Wars changed the British public's perception of Doctor Who. It suddenly didn't seem fit for purpose anymore. When you had Star Wars with its space battles and armies of soldiers, and then Doctor Who with a few people clumping around a quarry, it lost its way a little bit, and the stories became less interesting. And I think after Tom Baker left, Tom had been in the show for 7 years, and the show lost its way. And I think the stories tried to become more sophisticated. I think they tried to make up by their lack of visual ability by being narratively more inventive and cleverer. You had episodes like Legopolis at the end of Tom Baker's period, which was all about mathematics, a planet that was ruled by mathematics. Castrovalva, a planet which didn't exist, but it sort of worked in its own sort of time loop based on a painting by Isha. And I think that the stories just became a little harder to get into. They became a little denser. And of course, the show finished in 1989 and came back in 2005. I think Russell T Davies very wisely brought it back down to basics. He stripped away all the mythos of Doctor Who, the Time Lords, and he introduced the show as a new thing, which he needed to do. And the stories were straightforward. Rose couldn't be a more straightforward episode. The Doctor meets Rose on Earth. He's already in the middle of an adventure, battling his old enemy, the Nestene Consciousness. He drops a vial of solution into the Nestene Consciousness that destroys it, or at least banishes it from Earth. End. Simple story. Even the next story, The End of the World, they travel to the end of the world, a space station that's orbiting Earth before it's destroyed. And that's a very straightforward story, and a lot of those early stories are very straightforward. I think when Doctor Who started to become complicated, and I'm going to go down a rabbit hole I didn't really want to go down, but I'm not going to stay down there long, is when Stephen Moffat took over the reins of the show in 2010, after Russell's successful 5 years in the driving seat. Stephen Moffat obviously wanted to do something different. He has said that he was fascinated by the concept of time travel, which he didn't feel had been fully exploited by Doctor Who in the past. He's probably quite right. Stories would often take place, the Doctor would go to the past, whether it was the Middle Ages or the age of the Vikings or the Highlanders, and have an adventure and go away. But what the show didn't do is look at time travel and the paradoxes and the concepts and all these sorts of things. And that, I think, is when the modern series suddenly became difficult. And I think part of that is because Stephen Moffat had had great success with the episodes he'd written under Russell T Davies. And he wanted to show, as the new showrunner, that he could be clever and inventive and tell puzzle box storytelling and labyrinthine storytelling, introducing arcs that would pay off in different places. But that didn't happen a lot of the time. I think a lot of the things that he introduced into the series either didn't pay off at all or didn't pay off very well. I think there were sort of hurried resolutions to things. He liked to plant stories and elements of things through time that will be picked up later on. And many of his stories involved people waiting hundreds of years for things to happen, or billions of years for things to happen. He introduced concepts that were just too extreme for the general public, who just wanted an adventure in space and time to come to terms with. One of the most lauded Moffat-era stories is Heaven Sent, which was one of the last episodes of season 8, which is to do with the Doctor dealing with grief at losing his companion Clara in the previous episode. Of course, she wasn't really dead. And it's all about him being trapped on a tower and being stalked by this creature. And I've always thought it's an Emperor's New Clothes episode myself. People go, wow, this is amazing. But actually, there's not a lot to it. And this introduces an element where the Doctor is punching a glass wall for 4 billion years or something. And I think ideas like that are too, not necessarily sophisticated, but too extreme for an audience that wants to see the Doctor fighting aliens. And that's basically what people come to Doctor Who for. The general audience, the important main audience, want to watch an adventure and a story that they can understand, that makes sense, has a beginning, a middle and end, something scary in it, maybe a monster or two. I don't think they're hugely interested in these esoteric, philosophical examinations of grief and despair and distress. And I think that's perhaps the road Doctor Who's gone down a little bit too much. I think in the modern era, too many stories and too many arcs are focused on the Doctor and his past and how his feelings are affected by the things that happen to him. And certainly the stories have become a little bit less fun, I suppose. And I think that's what Peter Purves is referring to. The stories are clever, getting cleverer, but that's not necessarily what the general audience who watch the show want, which I think partly explains why the audience has drifted away from the show over the last few years. There are several factors. I mean, I could do a whole other video now about ratings and Doctor Who's public profile at the moment, but I think that will become apparent in the next few weeks. And the show's been on since 2005. It's an old show now. There's been 15 series and umpteen specials, so it's not new and fresh anymore. And obviously it tries to invigorate itself and reinvigorate itself. And one way to do that is by telling cleverer and more twisty, confusing stories. And there's been lots of stuff that's been drafted into the story, all the stuff about the timeless child, which has completely muddied the origin of the Doctor. Now, I don't object to that because I think it's quite clever, because it reintroduces mystery to the character of the Doctor. He's not just a Time Lord who went on the run. There's a bit more to it than that. I don't need to know anymore. I don't need to go back to that and probe that anymore. And I hope that the show won't at any point do that. I hope there's mentions of it now and again. I don't think we need to dig back into that too deeply. The stories are willfully now a bit more complicated. They do require some back knowledge of the history of Doctor Who. Again, it's inevitable. That always sort of bleeds through into the show because it has a 60-year heritage which is wrapped about its shoulders like a cloak, and inevitably bits and pieces of that are going to be brought back in because it's a huge sandbox of storytelling, and it's nice to refer to it now and again. But I think some individual stories maybe just get a bit too clever for their own good. But then again, you sometimes get simple stories. This year we had The Well, which couldn't have been a more straightforward Doctor Who story. The Doctor and Belinda land on a planet. The Doctor's been to the planet before. He knows the life form that lives there. It possesses people. In this particular episode, it stands behind them. His previous encounter with that entity absorbed their speech patterns and took them over that way. And that was a very simple, straightforward story. And that's been one of the best episodes of the year so far. So I don't know if I've come to any conclusions at this point because I'm 20 odd minutes in. Is Doctor Who too sophisticated? Or, as Peter Purves says himself, is it just too complicated for an 86-year-old mind? I don't find it too complicated. I lost interest in a lot of the stuff in the Moffat era because I didn't think that they were interesting ideas, sophisticated or not. And I think he thought they were more sophisticated than they actually were, because a lot of them, as I said, didn't pay off. A lot of them just were disappointing, and a lot of them were frankly nonsensical. That's perhaps where the audience started drifting, because it wasn't fun to watch anymore. It wasn't an adventure in space and time. It had become something more complicated. And I think after 60 years, storytelling styles change. I don't think you could necessarily do a story as simplistic as, say, Planet of the Daleks now. I think the audience wants a bit more. Certainly the fan audience does. So I think it's a position of sort of falling between two stools. Do you appeal to an audience that has grown up on Doctor Who, knows a lot about Doctor Who, wants sophistication and cleverness and bold ideas and narrative twists and turns as we're getting at the moment? Or do you want to appeal to a much bigger audience that wants an adventure, 45 minutes a week? You don't have to worry about remembering it or thinking about things that connect to other episodes, and then they watch the next one the next week. Certainly, there are lots of theories going around at the moment about this series, what Mrs. Flood, played by Anita Dobson, what she's got to do with things. All the stuff we've had about the suggestion that the Doctor is a fiction, or at the moment the world he's in is fiction, and all the stuff about the pantheon of the gods. It's interesting and it's clever, but I don't know that a general audience gives a damn, really, about all that stuff. They just want to be entertained. Their life's too short, and they have too many other things for people to watch and read and absorb to keep all this stuff about Doctor Who in their heads these days. I think it worked back when the show came back, because these things were fairly straightforward. In season 1 we had Bad Wolf, which paid off at the end. We had Torchwood in the second season, which paid off at the end. We had Mr. Saxon in season 3 that paid off at the end. And we had Disappearing Planets and so on in season 4. And all these things are very straightforward, that weren't huge parts of episodes, but they were just things that built if you were paying attention. But you can't help feeling now that all this stuff is crowding out the individual stories because it's asking too many questions that aren't going to be answered for a few weeks. So is it too sophisticated? Is it too clever for its own good? You tell me. I don't think I have an answer. I don't think I have an opinion, to be honest, whether it is or not. I think sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It can do very simple stories sometimes, like The Well, and that's a great episode. And it can do more complicated things like The Story in the Engine, which I'd found difficult to get into. So ultimately, I suppose it's a subjective opinion. It's your own view of whether you think it's too complicated or not, what you want from it. And to that end, I would be interested to hear what you think. I mean, what do you think of Peter Purves' comments? Do you think it's just an old man who's out of touch, like me sometimes, shouting at the clouds? Do you think Doctor Who has become too sophisticated? Certainly watching it now, although it's got the elements of what it's always been, it seems like a very different show, even from, say, 2005, which I think it needs to be. You can't just repeat yourself. But of course, with Doctor Who, it is such a broad church. It is such a huge canvas that its stories can be told on, that it never has to be one thing or the other. It can be anything and everything. And of course, the pace of things are different now. When Peter Purves made his stories, they were 25-minute episodes, 4-part stories, 6-part stories, whatever. And they had time to breathe a bit more, and the pace of TV was different then. TV is faster now. It's going to grab you straight away. And I think that's what they're trying to do with the current show. Clever ideas and just get on with it. Whether that works or not is what you want from Doctor Who. And I think that's possibly where some of the schism is between modern fans who really like modern Doctor Who and a cabal of older fans who want it to be 1976 again. And they tell you in no uncertain terms that they don't like modern Doctor Who, because it's not 1976 anymore. Storytelling styles have inevitably changed, and Doctor Who's changed to reflect that. So as I said, I haven't got an answer, and I don't know what I think. Whether it's too sophisticated, I think maybe that's the question. It's sophisticated, but is it now too sophisticated for the audience? Or it seems more likely to me the audience has just lost interest in the show generally because it's been around for so long. Other things have come along. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's too clever for its own good? Do you think it could be cleverer? Would you like it to go back to the old style of storytelling? I mean, I've always said that Doctor Who would never go back to being 25-minute episodes. But having said that, that format is sort of being resurrected a little bit. There's a new series out this week called Murderbot, which I think is on Apple Plus, which is 25-minute episodes. And I think that some of the Star Wars series have been 25, 30-minute episodes. Whether Doctor Who in its future could reconsider revisiting its past format, I don't know. Let me know what you think anyway, because this is something I could just spitball for ages, I suppose. And I apologise for not having said one way or the other, because I don't think there is a one way or the other. It's entirely down to your own view and how much you enjoy the show, whether you find the stories hard to get into or whether you find them simple or whether there's other things you don't like about the show. But I'd be interested to hear what you think about this issue that Mr. Purves has brought up about the over-sophistication of Doctor Who and its storytelling. So please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. If there's any points that I haven't made, there probably are, make them in the comments down below. Keep it civil, of course. Doctor Who is always a tinderbox for inflammatory comments and stupid opinions and comments. Fortunately, you don't get a lot of that on this channel because you're an intelligent bunch. So let me know what you think of Doctor Who's current position in terms of its storytelling. Is it too clever for its own good? Do you think it should go back to telling, even if just occasionally, more stories like The Well, which are just the Doctor fighting something alien and finding a way to beat it, which has always been a pretty good formula. And I think the show has perhaps moved away from rubber monsters and that sort of more simplified version of the show's format. So yeah, please leave a comment down below. I would love to know what you think. Thank you for watching. As I said, if you're new here, please like and subscribe. I hope this slightly jumbled video, as I said, I didn't think of what I was going to say. I just thought, well, let's just go in and talk about this and invite you lot to comment on it. I didn't sit, and I never do, I never sit down and bullet points, I must say this, I must follow that, because this is a sort of topic that is subjective, and I just try to put across my view, my observation of the history of Doctor Who and how its storytelling has changed over the years. Whether for the better or not is entirely up to you. So thank you for watching. I will see you soon. If you're interested in a fabulous Keep Taking the Stuff t-shirt, there's a link down below where you can click and get hold of one. Very reasonable. Everyone's wearing them, so you don't want to be left out. Right, I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.